All right, well, I want to welcome our presenter, Alice Madden, the staff member at Community Power, formerly Minneapolis Energy Options, an energy democracy nonprofit with a mission to activate Minnesota cities and towns to create a clean, local, equitable, affordable, and reliable future. She supports coalition work on inclusive financing, cooperatively owned community solar gardens, and community peer learning about efficiency. Great. Yeah, we definitely have some time for questions here. I see a couple questions coming in right now. And before we get to those questions, just real quick, for those of you who want to get your Con Ed and you're watching here today live, take that survey that pops up or take it in an hour when it's sent to you through email. Please don't take it twice. For those of you watching this in the future on demand in the recording, make sure to follow the requirements of what to do for your quiz. Specifically, if you're taking it on our YouTube channel, head on down to that little YouTube logo, and then on the left there you'll see you can click show more under a brief description, and then on the right you will see a link with some more details on where to access the quiz and take it while you're watching the session. And then also real quick before we get to our questions here, I do see some questions coming in. Want to thank our board of directors, all of our volunteers, our members, our staff here, Jessica, for everyone who allows us to do what we do, and our top tier sponsor, Shrinergy, for on the go and in your house, backup solar power generators for not if, but when the grid fails, T-stud structurally insulated framing systems that save money and energy behind the walls, Mitsubishi all electric for going all electric net zero heat pump systems that work great even when it is super cold out, as well as Panasonic ventilation, meeting all of your needs to basically comply with code, all the way up to new smart ventilation systems that they have coming out. So, you know, this question here is a fantastic question. I'm glad it's asked, and I'm going to add a little bit more to it. And, you know, the question specifically here is, investor owned, but publicly regulated. How does anyone convince the utility to do these programs? And so I just, adding to that, I think that was a big question I had in my mind is, for us practitioners who want to see this happen wherever we may be, how do we engage our utilities, depending on maybe what kind it is, or our publicly elected officials, to make this important and move something forward?
Sure, that's a great question. And I think one of the things that we spend at Community Power, we spend a lot of time thinking about, because it is not the case where you have a good idea, you test the good idea, that it's going to de facto be adopted just because it's a good idea. And I think that's a lot of what people who have been seeing this as a really exciting way to equitably transition the grid into something that doesn't make us sick, have been banging their head against the wall trying to figure out. And what we have found in talking with other communities who have been doing this, and through our own work here in Minnesota, and I wish I had asked a poll question about who's where in which geographies so we could talk a little bit about that. But I think our bias is towards, in terms of how to make this happen, is really local leadership. So, and it can't, I think that's the other critical piece, is like, you can't make this happen with a curmudgeon utility who doesn't want to do it without that local leadership saying, yes, we have to do this, and we'll find a way to do this if you won't help us. But also, if you get a willing utility and no one in the community knows about it, you are bound to have people worrying that this is, I think there's some examples of this where people think this is, have not had enough time to process what this is, to think it's not a lien on your property or something that's going to get you evicted, or like there's tons of really intricate things about how people's, like the power dynamics that are going on in people's lives, that it really has to be community driven, I think, in a lot of ways, to get that uptake and familiarity with it, and to really have the not about the program design necessarily, but about the community outreach that's done, about all of those things to get people into the fold. If your program outreach is all done in English and you have a huge population of people who are Spanish speaking primarily, or Hmong or Somali or whatever other like language and messaging issues, it has to be community driven. I think that's that's where that's our perspective. But I think it's proven out in the fact that we have gotten so far in Minnesota, and I just will speak to Minneapolis specifically first, and then broader, is that we have two utilities who aren't very interested. And haven't been interested, but they have gotten to the point of we are now pretty close to some more movement at the actual regulatory level to get this under consideration because of phenomenal leadership at the city level saying we're going to make this a clear priority to meet our climate goals and because we have strong equity goals. So really setting your compass based on what are the goals that you need, and then really making time for those relationships with local leadership who are electeds, but also grassroots community groups who can come along and really shape what's being asked and get more leverage with both local leadership. And I think it's something that local leadership, at least in my experience, has been really excited about. It's not a controversial thing for local leadership. And so it's something that they can feel good about doing for their community. And the more time you spend helping the local leadership get the technical expertise that they need in order to fight those battles, the quicker and the more like the longer term fights that you can win with those local leaderships beyond inclusive financing that are really critical to where we go in climate change work, in affordable housing, and in all kinds of things that really affect the day-to-day lives of people.
Thank you so much for that. The next question, getting a little more specific, is you mentioned that the user has no upfront costs, but then you mentioned that the user pays administrative costs. Can you clarify on that?
Sure. So the tariff that goes onto people's bills, again, there is no upfront cost unless you're doing something where it's the incremental cost of a boiler or something like that. That's sort of the rule of inclusive financing that you can use. I'll just pause there. There's all kinds of ways this can get more complicated, but for the measures that are like insulation and attic air sealing and the incremental cost of a HVAC system, that tariff that goes onto your bill is inclusive of the administrative cost. So baked into what you're paying on the tariff, that's still saving you a net savings over each month, includes that administrative cost, but it's not something that you pay out of pocket up front, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and they can follow up if they wanted to add. So I wanted to just clarify that is sort of the ideal or the intention or the concept that if whatever you're paying is effectively pretty closely matching what you're saving as far as your monthly bills, so that it's sort of a cost neutral wash. I mean, is that the goal? Do you see that being realized more often than not, or can you just explain that a little bit more?
Yeah, so I would highly recommend watching these Southeast Energy Alliance webinars. They have a lot of detail about like case studies, going very specifically into two different programs that have been operating. And I would say the idea is that it's not a wash. It's the first number of years, that 80% of the lifespan, you're paying 80% of the savings, but the 20% savings is still going into your pocket. And depending on how much energy you use, that can be a decent chunk of money year to year, over the whole course of the year. And I think the other issue here, when we come back to that, like the context setting of who is this for, who is this reaching that other loan-based programs are not, is that this is not meant to be a lottery ticket. It's meant to be shaving the peak load over our energy grid altogether. So we're using less and needing to, having fewer rate increases because we don't have to pay for more energy infrastructure because we're using less energy. But on a household level, it is that $20 a month that family no longer has to spend, that gets them by, is sort of keeping someone in their home longer. Shutoffs are a huge issue and can be a kind of a snowballing effect into evictions. And it also prevents like the home and the health and safety issue is huge. preventing fires from not having electric heaters going or using ovens to heat homes. But it really is, there is a net savings to the customer on all the ones that are using that 80-20 rule.
So can you help me with the 80-20 rule? Let's just say I pay $100 a month. Is it
Yep.
then that I am now saving $80 but still paying $20 for this program, or I'm paying $80 for this program and saving 20? Is that, or am I thinking of that entirely wrong?
Brett, do you mind sharing or having me share the screen? And I've got the House Smart Kentucky example up again.
Okay.
That helpful visual.
Yeah, Jessica, if you want to kick that back over to her.
Oh, that's Jessica. Great. Okay, so we've got this back up here. So here's a model. Again, that I think they've used the exact same example that you had, Brett. So your estimated savings are $100 a month. You're being charged the tariff that we'll see on their bill is $70, and then you're still getting that $30 a month.
Okay, so I was just missing the savings piece, but okay, great.
Yep. Yeah.
Thank you. Now,
Sure.
what about issues? Obviously air sealing and insulation and many other aspects too do help with health. But have you seen anyone try to address things like non-energy benefits that don't actually save any money, but can help, with a health improvement during these upgrades, or any other partnerships that have been added into the fray to help make that happen?
That's a really wonderful question. I would love to see that. I don't have any specific examples. That doesn't mean they don't exist. And I think in the Minneapolis example, we have really, I think, exciting amount of just kind of holistic thinking in the health department. And so we have the potential to kind of use some of the Healthy Homes lead abatement money. So if, windows, as I'm sure everyone knows, are just pretty much never going to pencil. To be cost effective, to be able to save you more money, to be able to qualify for inclusive financing. But I think there's the ability, if a program is designed right, to integrate some of these other sources of funding, like the Healthy Homes dollars or lead abatement programs, or other federal programs that are helping with other things, like say someone's in there's structural issues that have to be solved for a house that clearly needs energy upgrades, but needs a bunch of other structural stuff first. Like I think I've heard that a number of times from contractors saying, we're going into this house that really clearly needs the bill savings, but we can't do anything until we spend $10,000 of structural upgrades. So again, I don't have specific examples to point to, but I think when people are coming into the program design and really invited in by utility leadership and the city leadership or the town leadership that they've kind of cultivated, and those relationships that they've built, being able to point to these and think of innovative designs that can incorporate those other sources of funding is absolutely brilliant and really important to do.
Thank you. So let's move on to the energy models and rating. Obviously, it sounds like you need to be able to forecast to some degree what the savings are going to be for the financing, I suspect. So, first off, how is that audit even being funded or paid for? And then second, what's being used to verify accuracy of the model? I mean, a lot of times, a lot of people sort of, downplay models as just being, a waste of time or inaccurate. So, how are they being funded, and how are they being verified for accuracy so the financing is accurate?
Yes. So another shout out to a group that you all should touch base with, and at the CEA webinars that I mentioned a couple times have a webinar with this group. They're called eUtility. Tammy Agard is the main founder there, and they're one of the original kind of program operators and doing excellent work. And the way that they're estimating savings is not based on a deemed savings approach. That's like highlighter, bold, underline. It's not based on that model. It is based on a home by home assessment. And then that allows them to see in a case by case scenario what pencils, so that they're not putting a charge on someone's bill for something that really doesn't make sense in their scenario to pay for like that. Let's see, what was the other part of your question here? Just so it's a very specific house estimate. Sorry, go ahead, Brett.
Yeah, well, again, it was just, how are the assessments funded? Because there's a cost to that.
Yes, totally. So similar to the administrative costs, that includes the audit cost. So those are paid for by program participants, and I think the reason why that is an appropriate cost or makes the program function is because the acceptance rate is so high that it is, some of these programs in Arkansas, we're seeing a nearly 100% yes rate. And so essentially everyone who got an audit was doing one. The conversion rate was astonishing. So that is baked into the administrative or program cost is every audit that's done. So the contractors aren't, taking a gamble on doing an audit and not getting paid for it. And then there's also, other ways to kind of supplement that funding for that. So the city of Minneapolis has used the franchise fee dollars that comes out of the right-of-way payments that the utilities make to the city for using their streets to dig holes for poles and wires and stuff, and use some of that money to buy down the cost of audits. And so, there's other innovative ways that you can find pots of money to supplement that, and then make the kind of to get more people in the door. But ultimately, inclusive financing programs are structured so that those audit costs are paid for by the program participants.
Can you elaborate that the one, I don't know, Alabama, Arkansas, I forget which state you said, yeah. You said that there's nearly 100% uptake, but these folks are actually paying for the audit out of pocket up front. Is that accurate?
No. So it's they are receiving the audit. Then when they say yes, that charge is collected from them through the tariff.
So I think another main question is just, financing the audit if they say no, which it sounds like in this case may be statistically irrelevant, but.
Yeah, so yeah, I think statistically it's it's very, very small, but it's factored into the, I think, I'm not sure the line by line where that comes in, but it's charged to all the participating participants, I think. Or, I think you could structure it probably in a way that says, the city or township that you're in is so sure that people will say yes that they will, buy out the ones that say no or something like that. But those no's are factored into the cost of the tariff.
Can you elaborate a little bit more on how you see this financing mechanism breaking down the tenant power to make improvements, the barriers of tenants not having decision-making power?
Yeah, absolutely. So of course it is not your landlord will say yes to this. Like there are still, the power dynamics are still pretty raw there. And there are landlords who will never do that under threat of law. Like there are plenty of examples of people who are just straight up like slumlords or, not trying to improve their property at all. So those are like a different type of intervention. There are a decent number of landlords who really want to do something, but they're kind of mom and pop landlords too. And so they don't have the upfront cost to do anything more than like the repairs that are absolutely critical for, basic structural soundness. And so one piece of this is like, so that there's the data from the other areas, which again, like I think there's more testing to be done in really rural, really urban areas. But the yes rate for this Arkansas program for the multifamily units were 100%. So landlords are like the ones that are really actually taking care of their property are nearly all saying yes to this offer. And so the tenant is able to have their building improved either by the landlord financing it on the utility bill that the landlord pays, or through each successive tenant benefiting from a lowered energy bill and paying for that tariff. And so there's some addressing of the split incentive where the building gets improved, which is good for the landlord, and in some cases the tenant is both paying for and benefiting from those energy savings. And in other cases, the landlord is accountable for the energy bill, and so they're paying for and like saving that. So I think there's a lot to be said about how the policy happens. So making sure that like this could be tied into kind of like a I'm not sure if other folks have a tiering system for their rental properties where they are, but we have one where the tiering, there's 3 different tiers. And if you're in tier 1, I think if I don't get this backwards, tier 1 means your property is in, good shape, and we're gonna inspect you less and we're gonna charge you less per year because we know you're doing a good job. And tier 3 is on the edge, and we need you to we're gonna audit you every year to make sure that you're not energy audit, but like inspect you every year, and we're going to charge you more for your rental license each year. And so there's ways that this can be tied into saying, hey, you can bring your tier up to tier 2 if you take advantage of this inclusive financing program. And so there's again, it's not a shoe-in, but the offer is so good that there haven't been I think there haven't been very many no's, if any at all. And for the ones who went through the program, who went through the audit process, and there's ways to make it sort of a carrot and a stick, which then places that can really like the grassroots groups who can really take advantage of this, who are tenants' rights organizations or homeowners associations who are in solidarity with those groups, or neighborhood organizations who can say to their city leadership, we want to not have to heat their homes with ovens, or to be more comfortable, to save energy bills, and here's a really clear tool, and we'd like to see that you incorporate it as something in your rental licensing policy, or something in your to qualify for affordable housing dollars, or any other number of things where you can kind of insert that and say, this is really no skin off your nose here to do this program, and we're also going to require it if you want to do some things. So there's a couple of ideas there. Yeah.
Great, thank you for elaborating on that. I think the last question here is more on the folks who are doing this work in the contracting side, who we work a lot with, and I think the biggest question is, how are these folks, getting funded? Because obviously, especially with the labor shortage, it's very hard to convince someone to do something if they're not, so sure that they're going to actually get paid to do the work, which is very important, and to do it right. So just real briefly, what are some of the mechanisms to ensure the contractors are being, paid to do this kind of work?
Yeah. So and again, I hope this is useful for me to keep bringing up Minneapolis examples and feeling relevant, but we did a workforce study in the city of Minneapolis, both for solar and energy efficiency jobs, like what's the potential here? And I think there's a lot of really exciting and serendipitous or just no duh overlap between solar and energy efficiency work, and kind of the seasonality of solar work in some places. And just the fact that you can't really outsource those jobs. And so again, back to the CEUS webinars, there's a really great one on partnerships with local universities to kind of funnel people into the awareness and educational channels to get trained up to be part of these programs, or to be part of, contractor energy efficiency work in general. or utility work in general, line workers and stuff like that. And utility, again, is a great resource on how they have done this. And what they have seen is, so they have done a pretty rigorous training program for people who want to be able to operate, be contractors selected for inclusive financing tariff programs. And so they'll have, kind of a qualified contractors list, and there's quality assurance checks in it. So utility operates the program and verifies that the savings are going to be what they said they would be. I think they've had an interesting experience where some contractors are saying, kind of we know this sort of deemed savings approach, and we're not really interested in doing that. And so it has opened up the workforce to new people who maybe never would have considered this work, because it's a 101 kind of level training where you're getting people who maybe have some knowledge but are not experts yet, and kind of regrounding them in this particular way of doing audits. So I think there's both opportunities for existing contractors to be kind of brought along and brought alongside this work and give input into and shape how the program setup would be. And then there's also potentially a really great window into inviting in more people, which I think is exciting from all sides, both because of the labor shortage, and then also this really stark employment gaps between different racial groups because of the history of this country and how we have marginalized people over decades. And so I think there's these openings into welcoming veterans into this space, welcoming returning citizens from formerly incarcerated folks into the space, as well as really boosting a strong workforce for existing contractors. And the long and short, so I'm sorry I skipped over the first part of your question, but contractors get paid there's no wait and see type of thing. They're paid through this program, and the quality assurance is the main thing that contractors are that's sort of the in return for making sure that this work is absolutely done in the right way.
Thank you. We are at our time, and I really appreciate you taking some time with us here today, Alice, and thanks again to Community Power Minnesota. And before we wrap up, where can people go or contact you to learn more?
Yeah, so that slide that you had up there with my email is the best way to contact me, alice@communitypowermn.org. And you can also go to our website, which is just communitypowermn.org, and there's a subheader at the top of that website for the inclusive financing work that we're doing in Minnesota. And yeah, would love to connect with anybody who's interested on this stuff, in addition to how do we do this for other types of things that we need in our communities, other home upgrades that are efficiency based or solar based, or electrifying the grid, or basic health and safety stuff. So I'm really happy to spend more time talking about it.
All right, Alice, well, thank you so much for joining us. Take care. Have a good rest of your week, everyone. Goodbye.
Yeah, bye.